Hello and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson Timar, and today I am genuinely so excited. I know I say that every single week pretty much, but genuinely this might be my most anticipated episode of the year because myself, the good old Nicolò Grasso, and Hillary White are joining forces to discuss Werner Herzog's Grizzly Man, telling the tragic true story of Timothy Treadwell, a man who loves bears, who spent every single summer going to Alaska and living alongside the bears until one summer him and his girlfriend end up getting mauled to death. This film tells not only his story through a lot of archival footage that he filmed in Alaska, but also interviews others close to him or others in the surrounding area to try to build an understanding of who Timothy Treadwell was and what went wrong in his story. This is basically a spiritual successor to our Anatomy of an Adaptation episode on Into the Wild. I think this is a great conversation as we both discuss Herzog's work here as a documentary filmmaker, but also really discuss and debate Timothy Treadwell. Just like Christopher McCandless in Into the Wild, this is a very polarizing figure. The film presents a lot of information and a lot of different takes on him, and today we really get into the connection that Herzog feels with him. Is Timothy Treadwell innocent? Should we look up to Timothy Treadwell? Should we look down upon him? And also just a great discussion on documentary filmmaking, the power of documentary filmmaking, and the choices Herzog makes to bring this enigmatic figure to life. I am so excited again to get into today's episode. I think it's a really, really good conversation. So without further ado, let's get to our review of Werner Herzog's Grizzly Man. Okay, Nick and Hillary, thank you so much for joining me today for Grizzly Man. Genuinely cannot wait for this conversation. This is one of maybe my all-time favorites, and it really is a sequel in many ways to our conversation we had on Anatomy of an Adaptation about Into the Wild, specifically the book version. I would say the movie can probably just be left at the door today, but talking about this look at this man who makes a lot of choices that are interesting, leading to his demise, and then looking at the reactions to that. But before we get there, I want to quickly, because this week Spotify released the Spotify Wrapped for podcasters, where we get data about our audience and we get data about our show. So really quickly, want to go over these. Now, to be clear, this is only based on Spotify. So if you listen to this on YouTube, if you listen to this on any other podcasting platforms than Spotify, they don't care about you. They don't count you in this information. So this is fun. This is not holistically all of our audiences, but if you're on Spotify, you are represented here. I will say positive increase in unique listeners and followers. So we had a good year as far as that goes. Our most popular episode on Spotify was Weathering with You. Shout out my birthday special. I guess I picked a good one there. Our top countries are the US, the UK, Norway, Australia, and the Czech Republic. Shout out our Czech Republic stands. But I do know if you go into analytics, you can see other listeners. I do know we have a huge group still in Brazil. So our Brazilian ClapperCast stands, we see you. Thank you for still being here. As far as our top artists, I like that this year it gave us information about what you audience members consumed as far as media. Our top artists include Bad Bunny, Kendrick Lamar, and of course Taylor Swift. That made me very proud. Our number one artist. So Swifties, you are still out there. As far as top books, I thought this was interesting. The number one book read by you at home was Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green. I love that we're learning about diseases. We're getting educational. Our second top book was a book talking about the Charles Manson cult and how that worked. So our ClapperCast cult leaders, shout out. I love that we are part of your routine every week. Please don't kill us, but I love that there was at least multiple people listening to this exact book on Charles Manson. Our top podcasts other people listen to include Last Podcast on the Left, The Big Picture, If Books Could Kill, shout out them, those great people. Our stats include 75% of people listen to our podcast longer each episode than other shows, and we had a 75% higher average rating than other shows. So overall, a great year. Thank you everyone who listened on Spotify or any of our services. I thought this was very fun. I thought it was very that sounds like our group. That sounds like our people. Yep. We appreciate you here on the show, both myself and I'm sure all the other hosts who've been here all year long. With that said, let's get into Grizzly Man, Werner Herzog's film, 2005. Again, I think a very personal favorite, and I think one we're going to be pretty high on today. And I'm excited to discuss. I'll turn over, Nick. You're the stand. You met this guy. I've seen him in person. You've met this man. You've shaken his hand, I believe. What was your introduction to Herzog in general? What was your introduction to Grizzly Man? And then what are your opening thoughts on Grizzly Man?
Oh, this could be easily like a epic Jack ramble if I wanted to. No, I am a fan, a stan. I would say a scholar of Herzog. It's just someone that I was familiar with by cultural osmosis. Just you hear of Herzog, Klaus Kinski. I've seen some westerns, so I knew who he was. And I never really watched a Herzog. I want to say the first one I did watch was probably Pet Lieutenant Port of Call, New Orleans, some 10 years ago at this point, 9 years ago. And it was definitely a peculiar film to watch. And then when I started delving deeper into his actual works, especially his older films from the 70s and 80s, I fell in love. There is something incredibly freeing about the style of Herzog's filmmaking, in a world where so many people always try to put you down for your ideas, for the way you want to make movies, especially when it comes to documentary. You need the budget for this, you need this person, this other person, you need a big crew. Herzog literally says, all I need is someone to do sound or someone to do camera, and I can do sound. We need two people crew, we can shoot whatever we want. And it did. And it's made, in my opinion, some of the most fascinating, insightful, peculiar, weird, unique documentaries ever through this method. And even his movies are fairly small scale compared to other projects. And this brings me to Grizzly Man, which I did watch when I was going through my big Herzog phase of discovering his work back in 2017, 2018. And I really loved it. And even rewatching it now, I still really love it. It's easily one of my favorite films that he has made. It is I call it a Rorschach test for the viewers who watch it, because the way that you react to everything that you see on screen tells you more about yourself, your own views on world, humanity, and nature than it does about Timothy Treadwell himself. He was 100%, like, in my opinion, he was very weird. He was very um um but I'm struggling to like the right word, like because I want to be slightly respectful as best I can. But he did not fit into society. He was an outcast for internal reasons and external reasons, and this is something that was helping him cope with life, with living. Seeking the company of grizzly bears, trying to protect them, and to do this big humanitarian, like not humanitarian, like animal protection work that wasn't really working. Like, you constantly see him talk about those things. Like, did he actually do something practical about it instead of just getting very close to those animals and capturing them? Not really. But through this act, he was trying to find his own inner peace, and I find that to be quite moving in a way. There's all of the information that you learn about him that slowly exposed as the film goes on. There are more details and more facets of his personality that come to the surface in a way that makes it quite compelling. Jumping around in time, meeting different people, and it goes to some very dark places. It goes to some very emotional places, in my opinion. And I found it to be very complex, a very complex, complicated character study. And I'm very excited to dissect it today with the two of you.
Hillary, I'll turn the same question over to you. When did you first discover Grizzly Man, and what were your thoughts on it initially?
That is more of a challenging question than I thought it would be. I was just trying to think back. When is the first time I heard about this film? When is the first time I heard about Herzog? And what I ended up thinking about while preparing to answer as well as I could was he definitely is a word of mouth filmmaker. And I feel comfortable saying that because I definitely heard about him before the way the internet is now. I feel like probably a lot of people discover him through like viral clips or through social media because there is there is something very memeable about him, which is in a way kind of sad. This is an artist we're talking about, an artist, a writer, a filmmaker, but he's so memorable just because of his personality. So I don't have an answer. I'm trying to think, when did I first hear about him, or how he ended up on my radar. And I think my guess is that once I went into film school, I must have just started hearing him being mentioned, um, among other students and professors, that sort of thing. And the first memory that I really have is that we had this equipment checkout kind of closet in one of the film programs that I attended, and you had to go in and check out film equipment, and there'd always be a television there, and they would be playing something random. And one time I walked in and they were playing Even Dwarves Started Small. And I remember just watching that in the screen, and there was a discussion about it, like, this is Herzog, and you watch that, and I mean, it's just all these people in their 20s looking at each other and being like, what the fuck is this? It's so strange. Um, but it explains things that came afterwards, especially like Harmony Korine. I know that Gummo in particular, and things that he did, are in conversation with Herzog, and that they have worked together. Um, but Grizzly Man, I think that it's the same thing. I probably heard about it during film school, and I'm not sure the first time I saw it. What has been interesting is I've seen it multiple times over the years, and I agree with Nick. I think that this is my favorite thing he has done, which is an odd thing to say because it is like one of his most accessible and I think easy to understand documentary features. There's just something about it that's so notorious. The story alone, a man who is somewhat obsessed with wildlife, to the point where he ends up getting murdered by the wildlife that he says he's going to protect. I think definitely the first several times I saw this, I kind of took things at their word. It's just like, oh, okay, well, obviously, like, there's got to be some sort of like agreement in place. Like, he is camping out there because these bears might be in danger, or something. Like, there was just a lot that went over my head, and watching it more this time and actually sitting down and thinking about things a lot more and digging around for information that is now more available on the internet, as opposed to the first time I saw this. It's a lot more ambiguous, and I think what makes the film, as Nick said, like a Rorschach test, is that there's certain things I think Herzog wasn't able to say or put in there because this is a story that was being produced and pitched to him by people who loved him and were his friends. So he couldn't really critique what Treadwell was doing. So we kind of just get like a picture of what they want us to see in a way, but there's enough that he leaves in there that if you actually think about it, you start questioning, like, wait a minute, what is he doing? This doesn't make any sense. Is he protecting anything? Is this making any difference? Why is he filming? And I'm sure we'll get all into that. All of us will get into that as the conversation moves on.
Yeah, and I'm going to echo, I mean, pretty much everything that you both have said. Big Herzog fan, definitely not like a scholar who have seen all of his work. I mean, it's a very deep filmography, but especially in his documentary work. I mean, my brain works in a way where it really loves the engagement these types of stories bring. And Grizzly Man is not the first time Herzog has covered a character study like this. You have like The Great Ecstasy of Woodcarver Steiner, which is looking at this ski jumper and his quest for greatness. You have, God, I'm going to blank on the name, but the one about the guys who go and climb the mountain, and that is almost very similar to this, where you're looking at these people about to go to attempt this otherworldly feat who understand that death could be waiting for them, and it's really asking them, like, why are you going to do this? What do you need out of this experience? And I think to talk about Grizzly Man, I really need, and again, not trying to like just bring this back to my special interest of our old conversation, but I need to talk about Into the Wild, because my introduction to this type of story really was the story of Christopher McCandless. Reading that book and seeing what John Krakauer developed in that story, where he took the story of tragedy and again, we have a full podcast on this, so go check this out. But in that story, in that book, he just throws the facts down. He throws the facts of how he feels about it, how others feel about it. Here's what we have from his diaries. You make your own judgment. You engage with the story in a way that it's not telling you this guy's good, this guy's bad, this guy's stupid, this guy's genius. You're allowed to engage with it however you want. And then watching Grizzly Man, which I watched after I read that book for the first time, it's exactly pretty much the same thing, just on film and with like a much deeper sense of tragedy as you get this man who you get these clips of him. And as Nick says, he is very weird. He's a very, very strange man, but he's also just like, I found him to be so incredibly likable. And as he goes about these nature and he has these foxes and he's playing with these foxes and he's standing around with these bears, like there's something about this that is intoxicating to where like it is an absolute joy to join him on these adventures. But you have it framed around this idea that it's not just his death, but also his girlfriend's death at the end of this. And you talk to the people, around him from the community, who knew him, who didn't know him. And what you get here is this really kind of beautiful text I love to engage with, where it's like, it's not necessarily, I would say, telling you, you have to respect this man, or you have to worship this man, or you have to hate this man, but it's just giving you all these perspectives. You get the indigenous perspective of the relationship between humans and bears. You get some pretty dated, I would say, look at like just how society feels about bears and feels about animals and conservation, and like, oh, we just hunt a bunch of these bears, and it's like, okay, well, that's kind of wild. I do think I agree with you, Hillary. There was a little bit more maybe talking about his actual work. It is very much so presented like, oh, he's there to protect the bears. And they never really get too deep into like, yes, he goes speak to classes and he has this company that protects ecosystems kind of vaguely around the world. But it's a film that opens these conversations, and I love to have some of these conversations today on the show. But I think it does so in a way, and I think Herzog is like the perfect documentarian for this, where he relates a lot to the subject, not just in the sense of as a filmmaker, but also with his expressions with nature. Obviously, if you look at Herzog's career, he's battled nature, he's tested nature, he's tried to pull boats over mountains, like he's tried this whole experience. So I think you get that personal connection, very similar to what McCandless had with Krakow with Into the Wild. And I think the results are this really, really stunning, this really deeply emotional documentary, because even Into the Wild, like, yes, you hear about his death, and yes, you have that sense of it's sad this man died, but you never see his face when you read this book. You never hear his words. You never see him that summer thinking, oh, he's a month away from death, or he's 2 months away from death. And you certainly don't get some of the brutality that this film provides. And there isn't that element of his girlfriend who's afraid of bears, who still is out there with him, which is like this insane concept. You don't get that tragedy. And I think that element of emotion, that element of tragedy, I don't know a better word, not just to repeat myself, I think that really elevates the impact this film has. And it also elevates, like, I think it's hard to look at Into the Wild and you can be like, oh my God, well, he had personal freedom. Like, there's this conversation of should like you have that level of personal freedom, but ultimately you can kind of excuse it, at least in my head, because it's like he knew what he was doing and it affected himself. Now Timothy Treadwell is not only affecting himself, but he's affecting these bears in quite negative consequences. Literally, his actions get a bear killed. It gets raised attention for these bears. You see directly in the film that these people are coming to the island directly, look at these bears, and they know of Timothy Treadwell. Like, there's a lot more here that I don't want to say sinister, because I think he means innocent intentions, but there is this negativity that follows his actions that I think really create like a very dynamic text and a very dynamic character for you to morally digest. I guess I will open the door. How did you guys feel watching this film about Timothy Treadwell? Did this film impact your view on this man?
It's very complicated, even listening to you both talk about those elements of his life and of his work. Where I completely forgot that some of the I'm blanking on the names. I'm terrible with names, but like the partner in the organization, the woman, the widow of Treadwell, she co-produced the film, and some of the other names like going through the credits at the end, I was like, oh wait, yes, like so some of the people that we just watching this documentary. So there is always that element of controlling the narrative. But I do think that Herzog lives enough moments of objective truth in the storytelling, where it never feels like he's necessarily pulling punches. Because even like of those moments that you mentioned, Carson, I'm thinking of the part where he sees the poachers, I think is the term, who arrive and they're like throwing rocks at the bears, and he's constantly talking, like the way he talks about everything that he's doing is like he's almost a hero saving the animals and everything. And the extent of what he does is just like from far away zooming in with his camera being like, no, don't you dare, don't you dare throw rocks at the poor bear. And that's it. And then getting very scared of them leaving smiley faces on on wooden rocks near his camp. Uh, he he kind of was all in the way that he's portrayed, of course, in the documentary. It comes across as someone who's more talk than action in that sense. He does spend a lot of time talking bigly and loudly and portraying himself as someone more important and grander than he really is, which makes sense because he needs it. And Herzog comments on this, on the fact of him being a filmmaker and an actor at the same time. He needs that camera to make himself feel important. Because I think if he was there by himself, just like writing a diary or a journal, something like that, he would not have lasted as long. He would not have been as successful as he ended up being, which is still moderate success. They even mention it in the documentary. So like he was making loads of money off of this, which is admirable. He could have taken fat paychecks, honestly, been on more TV shows, get paid for some of his appearances, and he didn't do that. So I props for that. But yeah, I'm curious if Hillary, maybe you have something to interject before I keep on rambling.
No, no. I think we're the way that you're thinking and the way that I'm thinking are definitely in conversation with each other. I,
Mm.
I think one of the things that I ended up trying to find out after watching it this time was, why was he recording? Because it just had never occurred to me. I just thought, okay, of course he's like compiling this footage, but it had just all this time. It's been 20 years since this came out. I thought, what is all this footage for? Was he trying to sell it? Was he trying to get interest from, producers to, mount a television show or something? And I didn't find anything that was official or confirmed, like through either someone he knew or something that he said. But there's a lot of speculation that maybe that was the case, that he did want it to get out there. But it's also possible, because it's a tendency that that I have myself, is that I make things and no one sees them. And there's other people out there too who have, lived and died where it's similar, like Henry Darger or Vivian Mayer. I think her name's pronounced Mayer or Meyer. Once they die, they find out, oh, there's like hundreds of thousands of photographs here, or
Hmm.
all these writings and of like this epic novel and stuff. And that he was just creating it because he had control over it himself. He was the star of his own world and his own movie, and he could look at it and no one else could judge it or intervene or have any control over it. It was just like something that was his, and that is something that becomes more apparent as the film goes on. I don't know whether that was intentional or not on Herzog's part. But I started taking notes where I thought, this is getting disturbing, where he's like, this is my land and my bears, and this is my territory, and this is my story, and I'm the king. Like he starts saying like things about himself that are really grandiose and, like you just said, Nick, not true. And he's not protecting the bears at all. He's not protecting them from anything. That's the one thing that I didn't know about. I had to look into where he was. It's like, it's a nature preserve. Like they're already on protected land. They're being protected by people, and people that are coming on shore. He says they're poachers, but we don't know that. I thought like these might be tourists. These might just be people who are landing here for maybe seeing the bears, maybe seeing something else, but everything is from his point of view. And he's like, people are after me, and they wrote a nice message for me on this piece of wood. See you next summer, something like that. He's like, this is a threat, I think, and trying to make it sound like they want to kill him. And it's like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very strange. So, I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Well, also you see to be clear, you see the people on the boat, and like they don't have guns. They're not like shooting bears. They literally like throw the rock at the bear that's approaching the boat, and outside of that, they're just like
They have
seemingly
a
normal people.
camera, photography
Yeah,
camera.
Also, then it cuts to the expert of, I assume, the same area, who's a park ranger or someone who works in the space, and he's like, "Oh, we don't really have poaching here. Like that's not our issue. We have some people who are locals who, like, if there's a bear nearby, might be afraid and kill it, but like we don't really have poaching at all." So at least within the film, and I'm not an expert on Kodiak poaching situations. But it doesn't seem like there's a legitimate threat towards poaching. And also, if they wanted to kill Timothy, you would think, like, if they were at his tent writing a message into the wood and drawing a smiley face,
I love the smiley face.
Probably wouldn't. I love that he shows it, and like he zooms in on it like dramatically, and he's like, "Look at this threat. Like, I don't know what this means, but it's something like mean." And I was like, "Okay, buddy. Like, sure." Yeah, it's definitely a weird one.
It's you could question at that point because we don't know if any of us were dropped in that preserve and were alone for as long as he was. There is I think for most people there might be a tendency toward paranoia, or being isolated that long might do things to you. So I can't really judge like whether that was normal or if that was actually a facet of his personality that was coming out like a persecution complex. The other thing that I had to confront was that this is someone who had a problem with truth and lying. And it was kind of framed as like, oh, it's just harmless, kind of like eccentric things that this guy did, like pretending he was someone else, that he came from other countries and would put on an accent. Or the story he told his father about like, oh, I spiraled because I didn't get a role on Cheers. I really don't think that's true. I think this is someone who needed to be someone else or be more important than who he actually was for nebulous reasons. And eventually it became centered on like, well, I'm going to be the savior for these bears. And it's like the bears are fine without you. They actually don't need you. Which seems like so reductive and mean to say because that was his whole life, but it's the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
It's something that you see constantly throughout the documentary, right? It's just him building those stories around what he's doing and what he's witnessing. It's just like bears chilling or like fighting for, and that's it. Like nothing. It's I think the beauty of the documentary comes from how banal nature can be in a way that turns magical. And there are moments of beauty and magic in here. I think honestly, like everything with the foxes is even better than everything with the bears. Almost, because he actually bonds with them, and you can see that they start following him around, maybe hoping for food, probably, but just they're together, and they steal his hat, and he's running around, and they're going through the fields. Like I think those are very beautiful moments. And even with the bears, there's something just so majestic and relaxing in seeing them just live or struggle to live, actually, because we find out as the documentary goes along that like it's not the best conditions in the world. They are struggling for survival, and we're talking about 2005. I don't think it's a coincidence that 2 years later Herzog made a documentary about the Arctic and climate change, and the glaciers melting and everything like that, because you can see an inkling of that here, of how the world is changing because of people. Treadwell also talks about that, whether he exaggerates or not. It is still an element of this where, there is still, like, do you need tourism to just have planes and boats of people going to these areas just to look at bears and be like, I've seen the bears, and then leave? Questionable. Everyone can have their own reasons why they want to do those things. It also makes me understand why he was so passionate about this. But then again, yeah, he didn't really do much about it. Like everything is centered around himself. It's all because he needed it.
To be fair, he did swim in the lake naked to scare away the planes.
Sure, yes. I'm sure that really
we did hear about that activism, so I will say let's not ignore everything he did. I do think it's interesting that the ways that though he was an activist and the ways he promoted I guess bear health and safety and conservation and everything was like going to talk to children. And then like he got all these letters that they showed of the kids being like, oh my God, you're the coolest person ever. He went on the news. Like, I think those are avenues that are very like reaffirming what kind of we're building, where it's like it is kind of self-centered. It is very much so like you want to be the coolest person in the world. You want everyone to like worship you in a way and think of you as that level, even if it's not for financial gain. And they talk, as you mentioned, Nick, about how he didn't have a lot of money or he didn't charge fees for these. You do get that kind of like emotional and social payment in a way to where like, yeah, I can see it, like, and then creating films about this and creating visuals where you can control that narrative and you can be right there next to the bear. I think that in the film really does justify what we are saying quite heavily.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's I ended up bouncing around on a lot of forums, things like that, I think even his supposed widow, I think she said she was platonically involved with him, but she's referred to as the widow, and I'm making sure that I am saying her name correctly. So like it's in the production section here. I highlighted it. His friend Jewel Palovac, who appears in the film briefly. She did a Reddit AMA a while ago, and there were some questions asked about Timothy and the nature of his work with bears, and what's true and what's not. It was a pretty friendly AMA, considering that that it was Reddit and some people could have come in and said really horrible things. I ended up getting some information from her, and then just people who live in Alaska, like his relationship with the foxes. They said, that some foxes are friendly because they do have like some sort of symbiotic relationship with people as far as like food and stuff like that. I did notice during one of the scenes of the foxes is that he's really nice to the fox, and then he points at his campsite and he orders the fox to go and guard it. So even in that relationship, he starts taking ownership of that interaction with the fox. Like he thinks he can tell the foxes what to do. There's just such a need within this man for reasons we're never going to know, unless it's stuff that his family did not want to talk about. There is such an insatiable need to be special, and not only special, but doing something that he honestly believed no one else was doing. And it seemed like that grew bigger and bigger in his mind the more he did it.
Yeah, I would say that's fair. I do want to quickly mention that you mentioned his widow, quote unquote. Fascinating character. I will say this film does have, and it's actually similar to Into the Wild, where I think some of the most interesting bits are with the people who Herzog decides to interview and talk to, because you quickly realize everyone in Alaska is kind of insane. It's kind of like Tiger King in that way, where like everyone, when you really sit there and really listen to them, do seem like kind of insane people. His widow they met because she like burned down the restaurant, or she like lit this huge fire trying to impress people. You have just like the coroner or whoever it is who had the body, and he sits there staring at the camera talking about these different bags. Like it's very off-putting, not just in content but like in just how he describes it and how he like everyone comes off as these very, very peculiar characters. But one thing I loved, and one thing I found interesting that I wish this film and Into the Wild were more explicit about, is like no one that he talks to who has an opinion on Timothy Treadwell, including us on this podcast, anyone who's ever talked about this guy, no one really has the full image of him. When you get into this like conversation of like a reliable or an unreliable narrator, where like all these people, and you hear them discuss, and you hear the letters from the Republicans who are like, good thing a bear ate a liberal, of course, but also the people in Alaska who are like, he was out there trying to be like kumbaya with the bears. And it's like, no, that's not really what he did. If you watch the footage and how he interacted with the bears, that's not true. As far as his widow and kind of understanding the morality of this, she's never, and good on her, I would not tell her to, but she's never listened to the tape that was recorded when they were attacked by bears. Like she doesn't have the full picture. You mentioned she's also heavily involved with the creation of this film, so she obviously wants to paint a certain image of this guy. We are met with like all these unreliable narrators who either are turning a blind eye purposefully or who just don't know what they're talking about with this guy. And all we're kind of left with, I mean, even Herzog himself is obviously an unreliable narrator. All he has is what was filmed, which is largely Timothy Treadwell putting on a performance. Like we will never, as you mentioned, Hillary, like really know who this guy was, what he was like. We only have what he reports in his journal, what he records, and then the takes of those around him who saw versions of him. I think that idea is super, super. I don't know. It's I guess engaging is a word I would use, but I think it's with stories like this, and I guess it's really every story you have with every single person from history. But like it really strikes me in conversations like this how unreliable these narratives and these characters we build for these people are. And there's also just obviously intense emotion around these. If my friend or my former lover got mauled by a bear, I would probably feel pretty heavy emotions around that. And I don't know if, like, as I'm being given the watch that was on his arm that was found as he was eaten, I don't know if I would be able in that moment to have like, okay, let's have an objective look at this guy and let's talk about all of his layers. It affects you. It affects how you view that person, how you view the story. I think that is something that is, again, largely unspoken in a way that I find to be understandable but somewhat frustrating. But that's always something that sticks out to me with these types of narratives, is really you are getting a tiny little glimpse of it.
Well, I think another thing I wanted to point out, because we've already mentioned Into the Wild a few times, and I wrote that down very early on in my notes. I said we have to mention the other conversation we had about Into the Wild, because when I started doing research after watching this again, Chris McCandless's name comes up so much in conversation with this guy, and especially among Alaskans. A lot of Alaskans hate both of them so much with like the fire of a billion suns, because of not only like the damage that they, from their perspective, the damage he's done as far as like animal conservation, and then of course, you know, survivalism, that sort of thing, and that they've been turned into martyrs by people who don't fully understand what these men did. So there was a lot of anger about that I encountered, and a lot of people who just have ready-made opinions and will write whatever they think on the internet, to the point where it got kind of exhausting, you know. Um, the other thing that really surprised me about this film, and maybe it's a little bit premature to get into this, was all the anger I encountered. Um, Not only concerning, it's just like this air of expectation and a lot of anger directed at Herzog, that we didn't hear the tape. That actually blew my mind, that I came across hundreds of comments of people saying he was a shitty filmmaker, or that the documentary failed because we didn't hear the audio on that tape. And I really disagree with that. I don't think we needed to hear someone getting murdered. But I think especially with the internet, maybe in 2005, there wasn't such an insatiable need for that. There's just this expectation of like, well, we should, like, I want to hear that. And it's like, why? Like, for morbid curiosity or pleasure or entitlement? I don't think that should be available. And after looking around quite a bit, there is a fake tape out there apparently. But the real one, it's not confirmed whether that has been uploaded online.
I mean, I hope it's never uploaded online. that's
Mm-hmm.
that's an absolutely wild take to have, and that's also definitely a highlight of the film for me. Of, like, I remember of all the scenes of this movie when I first watched it, this is the one that stuck with me the most. And at the time, I didn't even register it so much. I'm basing this just off having watched like 70 movies or something like that Herzog has made, or 60, whatever. Um, he never really appears in his own documentaries. You can hear the voice of screen rarely, mostly for comedic effect. He knows he can elicit a fun reaction from people, but he barely ever shows himself in them, unless he's like, like my best fiend about Klaus Kinski. He has to show himself when he's talking about Kinski. But in this case, it's one of very few instances where he puts himself in the documentary, where someone, like, it feels so weird to have someone telling, like, calling him by name. Yes, Werner, I'll do this. It's so out of body almost to listen to that. Um, but it is a pivotal scene. And it's something that I admire of the entire film, especially in the way that it's structured, where they tell you, like, one of the first things you see is the place of his death. Before you see a lot of the footage, before you know more about Timothy Treadwell, you know he's going to die. You know he died. And there is this constant shadow looming over all of the footage. So many statements that he made that are just eerie in retrospect. it showcases something, and I would say this of Herzog's filmography in general. He's not a religious guy, but I do find him to be very spiritual. Definitely a philosopher for me. He's more of a philosopher almost than a filmmaker in some ways. But he's deeply spiritual. You see that throughout his entire filmography, and the way that he uses the footage here, not only for some magic, but also for some instances of uh, cosmic karma. I don't know. I love the part where Timothy is just yelling at God, Allah, and all the deities in the world to please give water because the bears need water, and then there's the worst downpour possible for like a week straight. Or something like that. It feels unreal. It's the type of thing that you should put it in a movie. It's like obvious, but for it to actually happen, it's just a fun coincidence that reinvigorates Treadwell's belief that he is special. And
Yeah.
you can see it. It's just like the tent is crumbling, but this is what the bears wanted. Thank you, whatever, like multi-armed Indian god. Thank you, Allah, and everything. Um, and I think Herzog deep down believes in those moments of magic in the world. You know,
I will say, Hillary, one thing that like your conversation on people wanting the tape released, which is like like devastatingly
I was
insane.
absolutely
Like,
blown away by that. A lot of anger. Like we
yes.
deserve that. We have to listen to that. And I was so flummoxed.
we
But one thing
deserve
this reminds
that.
me of is how many people the next year after the film was released, when Steve Irwin died with the stingrays, were desperate trying to get the footage of that, because that was recorded and they destroyed the footage, I believe, or at least never released it. I believe they destroyed it. Similarly, I think they've destroyed this tape now with Grizzly Man. I could be wrong. But I remember online so many people like clamoring, like, release that footage. We need to see it. We deserve to see it. Like his final moments, as he gets stabbed by a stingray 100 times.
I don't
Pretty
know.
gnarly, horrible humanity. But like, yeah, I guess that I fully, yeah.
It's twisted.
Well, I mean,
It's
there's some tapes that I think Christine Chubbuck. There's supposedly the tape of her shooting herself during a news broadcast. I think like that's in a vault. From what I understand about the tape is that the tape is in a vault. She ended up not destroying it, and Herzog later down the line, I think it's even in the Wikipedia article, he said that was the wrong advice for me to give her. It is something that probably should still be around. It was just really emotional in the moment,
Oh.
having to listen to that. And it's worth pointing out, like some people said, oh, Herzog is a horrible filmmaker because he made that whole scene about him, and that's just not true. Even the way that the scene, like what the camera does, he's from the back, you don't see his face, and it actually zooms on her reaction, reacting to him, and her realizing how bad it is. And we don't know Herzog as people. We don't know him on a one-to-one basis, but we know enough about Herzog to understand that if it bothers this man, considering the information we know about him and what he's been through, that it's very bad.
Yeah.
And it's like probably the most tender I've ever seen him be with another person, where he says, you should never listen to this. And he like holds her hand. I don't think I've ever seen him do anything like that in his documentaries or during interviews or real life or anything, that it's just that bad of a tape. There are transcriptions of the tape. If there's people who are listening to this who feel a little insulted by us right now, who do feel like they're entitled, there are transcriptions of what happens on the tape and a detail about what you hear, but there's no tape. And you know what? That's all you're going to get. And if you are that morbidly curious, you can find that, because there was an investigation on his death. There's PDF files and things that reporters pull together that can tell you like the order of events and certain things that were said. But the tape, we don't need it. Think about it if it was someone you knew. Honestly.
Okay, well, a large portion of our audience loves Charles Manson, so like I don't know if we can. We just
Oh,
learned this. So I don't know if
that's true.
I don't know if we can speak to our audience. Peace and love. You know, they get crazy in the Czech Republic, but you know.
Yeah, if there was footage of the Manson murders, people would definitely want to see them. And I mean, there are photos of it. I have seen a few photos of the crime scene with Manson that I wish that I had not seen, you know.
Yep.
But that's me. Everyone's different, you know.
Well, and I kind of get, like, I don't want to. I'm good, right, personally, but like I do kind of get how, like, I think especially, not to sound like a complete serial killer, but like with a human body, like it's such a wild idea, the idea of seeing it like torn apart and eaten by bears, where it's like you can't imagine it. It's like unimaginable, and it's gross and disgusting. But I guess I could see how it's like that is so unbelievable that to see it could have like some cathartic moment of understanding of human flesh and human beings, and like we are just creatures, we are animals like all these other animals that die. I don't know, I could see someone. I think it's like it's not for me, but you know, if you're out there and you're like, I don't know, I would take a peek at it.
I'm sure
Not
there was I think you mentioned photos as well of probably like body parts
The
they
coroner
recovered.
reports.
Then the picture of
Yeah.
the bear getting all torn apart, which was too much for me. I was like, that's too much.
It's quite a bit, you know. I think that the draw for that, I mean, and this does relate to Timothy Treadwell himself, because this is someone who's inexplicably, or maybe explicably, drawn towards something that was very dangerous. A lot of people are afraid of death, and I think that the reason why people clamor for this kind of stuff is for two reasons, and this is just my opinion, so take it with a grain of salt. Either it's so they can habituate themselves with the fear of their own death, where it's like, well, I've seen that stuff and now I'm used to it, so death is not so scary anymore. And then there's some people who like it. That's where I get a little bit more nervous going into this. I'm not a psychologist or anything like that, but there's people who like to look at that stuff because they get some sort of pleasure out of it. And hopefully we don't have too many listeners that feel insulted by me saying that.
I mean, maybe you should feel insulted by that if it's directly relating.
Yeah, or just sit down and like think about that. Like, why do I get pleasure out of seeing other bodies or, you know, people getting?
I like to think
apart?
those people listen to like Uncut Gems, not ClapperCast. I like to think like it's contained over there, not here.
Different vibe, different crew.
Sometimes it comes across that way. Yes, it does.
I do have to say, I do appreciate something that touched me rewatching this documentary is the way that, and I forgot about this part, Treadwell cannot accept, for someone who loves nature, someone who loves animals and studies them and spends years with them, he cannot accept the circle of life. Like, all things are
Yes.
bound to die. There's a moment where there's a dead fox killed by wolves. There's the paw, like, honestly, like the paw of the baby bear just like lying on the ground is pretty disturbing for the implication. Like, what you're not seeing is even more bothersome in a way. But like all those parts and the skull of the bear that was eaten by his peers, like, he's not reacting as a scientist, as a real researcher in a way would react. He's so deeply invested that he cannot accept that they die, that this is how nature is. I think they mentioned, I think Herzog himself and other people say, like, he was not prepared for how brutal nature is. He never got accustomed to that. He never got used to that. You know, he was always looking at everything through these colorful glasses in a way. Like, it's this beautiful world, it's idyllic, it's magical, everything's beautiful and pretty, and every bear has a name, the weirdest names possible. But yeah, you get to those moments where he just breaks down, and I think it is what you were saying as well, Hillary, in a way relating to him. Like, he's trying to come to terms with his own mortality and just cannot. There's never a moment where you can
possible.
He was ready for death, and he says it, and he's like, if this is the last time I'm coming, like, I'm going there and I'm dying there, is what I wanted. Like, he makes those statements that, again, don't, probably they were coming from a true place, but they don't sound like real things people say. He's almost like he's self-mythologizing at that point. It's like building, like, my last famous words were this.
Yeah, he's performing at all times. Yeah, that's something that has struck me every time I watch this, and I'm sure it's the same with you, Carson, where I don't come from a background where people do that kind of research. I did think about a book I read when I was in grade school. It was written by Gary Paulson, who is, of course, most famous for writing Hatchet, which I think every elementary school kid in the US ends up reading at some point. But he wrote a nonfiction book called Woodsong, which was about his travels and living in Alaska and, dog sledding and stuff. And it's him observing stuff in nature that's extremely hardcore. And this is a
Hmm.
book for kids. Knowing where like that kind of nature writing or other things I read, like I read Jack London stuff as a kid, things like that, just observing nature. And it's just like animals die, they kill each other, they die of disease, it's not fair, they lay down somewhere. The flies do get in their eyes. I remember he gets mad at like a fly like touching the dead fox, and he's like, not while I'm around, because he kind of thinks of himself as the god or the master of the area. um, there's blood and there's survival and there's fighting and just like really disgusting things in nature. And I knew that it was possible that, you observe this kind of stuff and you respect it. That's the whole point, is that you respect that and you have to integrate it into yourself, where it's like, I'm out here too. Actually, I should have opened with this. Maybe not so much the time this came out, but I actually really love bears. I love grizzly bears. I think that and brown bears, all bears. I think they're wonderful. I also understand that if I saw one in real life, I'm probably going to die. And I wouldn't want to interact with a bear. I don't want to become friends with one. It's just not in my vocabulary. You respect the fact that they're over here and you're over here, and you leave them alone, because humans interfere with everything. And we have so much entitlement as far as like our dominion over animals and land and everything. And it's just a totally different world, and Treadwell cannot. There's several scenes where it seems like he just can't accept that he's going to die, the animals die, and like it's okay. And he's very childlike. It's almost like
Yeah.
he has the stuffed animals in his tent and stuff, and I'm like, you're a guy in your 40s and you sleep with a teddy bear. There's so many questions about this guy's psychology.
I loved his
Just
teddy bears. It'd be nice. I think I agree. I don't think it's necessarily like a negative thing with Troll. I actually like the fact, and I think it's like somewhat beautiful that like he still is so impacted by death and by violence. And like I feel like maybe we as a society should be more emotional towards those things. Like, yes, it's animals, yes, it's nature. And this is also with Christopher McCandless, and he also had this whole bit where he was like, I'm okay to die. Then he enters a situation where he's about to die, and he's like, actually, I don't want to die. This is not me, guys. Like, it was all a joke. It was all a bit. Like, pull me out. And Timothy Treadwell, granted, I think some of that also might be that he has a girlfriend there who's like doesn't want to die. But it reminds me of a conversation I literally just had. I literally last night randomly watched 1927's Chang, A Drama of the Wilderness, which is this like early documentary, if you're listening, documentaries in quotations, about a family in Thailand who's just like living life. But the entire movie is like an hour long, is them like fighting animals and like killing animals. They slaughter a tiger, they slaughter a bear, they slaughter like elephants. It's really fucking disturbing, but no one talks about how it's disturbing. Everyone is like, oh my God, it was like a fun little documentary. And I was sitting there last night like horrified. I was like, this is almost unwatchable because it's just animals getting slaughtered, and that's really gross for me. I'm like, I don't know. I think the fact that he went out, he had this relationship with the bears. Yes, like obviously a very critical conversation you can have about that, and we've had about that, but I don't mind the fact that he still like is so impacted by death. I think almost like, isn't it more psychotic if he's watching these bears get like eaten alive, literally finds the skull of the one, and he was like, yeah, that's just kind of how it is. Like, I don't know, I don't think that morality is necessarily a negative thing for Treadwell.
No, I think you bring up a really good point. And to kind of like fine tune what I'm trying to say is, I think it's great that he does have an emotional connection. I mean, humans have connections with animals in our lives all the time. And think about the devastation that someone goes through when, a dog they've lived with for years passes away, or a cat, or even like a bird, any animal, it's a part of our lives. The thing that disturbs me about Treadwell is very specific. The fact that he comes across animals who's died and he's emotional about it is fine. But it's when he starts saying things like, this shouldn't have happened to you, or like, this is just not fair. That's like, that to me is where it's troubling. I mean, seeing animals die in real life, there's some people really stoic about it, or they get used to it. And like you said, like it could become borderline psychotic. They become way too used to it. But the fact that it's his dominion over them, where it's like, you shouldn't have died. And it's just like, that's just like, that happens, honey. You're 45 years old. You should know this by now. Like, I know you're sad, but saying that it shouldn't have happened, it's beyond your control. That's what
Delusional.
disturbs me about that. Yes.
But he never goes, like, I will say he never tries to get, I mean, this is also getting like very fictional where like this is not his, logic at all, but like he never tries to get revenge against nature. He like keeps going and embracing himself in nature despite this. I guess that's an interesting like contradiction in a sense where he does grow close to this and he feels these bears. I mean, for months he's out there with them, so I get it, but like he does experience this tragedy, but it never changes how he views about these bears or about nature or about this ecosystem. Like I feel like if you were to take this in your heart and just every single year seeing like your quote unquote, let's say friends in this instance die, I feel like eventually I would probably be like, yeah, this is not for me. Like this sucks. But he like loves it still. It is an interesting contradiction I've never really considered, is like he kind of like has a miserable time every single year in some ways, like on a deeply emotional level, but he's still there. He's still doing it.
Yeah, that's the question you have to ask. Like, sometimes people do crazy things. I mean, this is a very extreme and specific example. What you end up having to ask yourself is, what are they getting out of this? There's even really miserable situations. We've all know people who their lives are miserable all the time, and all they do is they talk about how miserable they are. And you want to help them, or you listen to them, or you're their friend, or you're a family member, whatever your relationship is with them. As I've gotten older, what I have ended up asking myself is like, they're getting something out of this. In spite of all the misery or whatever physical or mental struggles they're going through. Even if, like, let's say he thinks of himself as like the kind of like he never said this, but I'm just putting this label on him, for fun. Like, he's the king of the bears, right?
Yeah.
And then you think, so he's doing something very specific that's physically difficult, mentally difficult. He sees a lot of things that are disturbing. And you think about something that's really deified or that we consider normal, like a top tier athlete, and all the damage that happens to their body, all the mental pressure that's put on them, that sort of thing. Some of them end up injured so badly that, they have to, they're not able to do it their whole lives. Or like ballet dancers, people who go through something, but there's something in it. There's something that they're getting out of it. With athletes or like a ballet dancer, this is just like an example of that. Like, we kind of know what that is. With Treadwell, it's a lot more vague, where it's like, what are you getting out of this? There is something that has to be feeding that ego, or that lack of adequacy. Do you guys remember the sequence where he's walking around and he talks about in several of his video diaries about women, or like relationships with women? He's like, women can't stay with me, but then he talks about what an amazing lover he is, and that he knows he's good in bed and stuff.
The gays have it so much easier.
And I was
much easier.
No, I love that, because that is an echo to the chapter in Into the Wild where he's like, was he gay? He spends like half a chapter just being like, well, maybe he was gay. Okay, he was not gay. Did love that.
Yeah, I took some issue with that. I saw where he was going with that, where it's like, okay, yeah, I kind of see it. It may be easier for gay men to hook up, but a lot of these gay men had to hook up at like underground sewers away from society, because if they were caught, they would be murdered. It's very different, Timothy. It's very different than hooking up with women. But yeah, he talks a lot, like someone who has to like talk about how good they are in bed. It's probably a sign that, yeah, maybe I'm overstepping my bounds here. Like, someone who talks about how good they are at stuff all the time, usually to me, from experience, it's like, you're probably not that great then, because people who are good at things aren't talking about it all the time, I suppose.
Look, not to be overstepping with anyone, it's a documentary, real people, right? Like, not to be inappropriate. This girl, his widow, is like, it's like a religion for her. That's something had to lead to that. Something had to lead to that is all I'm saying.
Yeah, it's something I was thinking about, because they're all characters, his friends, the one he is connected with. And I want to say pretty much everyone else that they talk to who's not directly related to him is quite harsh.
Oh yeah.
There's it wasn't a helicopter pilot. Like, it was one of the pilots, not the one who's of course taking him to the
the one guy who said the bears thought he was like mentally challenged. Like, he was like, the bears thought there was something wrong with his brain.
Yeah, like
and they just got tired and they murdered, and one of them murdered him.
it's like he
People
deserved
love
it.
that
What
clip, by the way. A
happened?
lot of people are like, oh, he was like, they thought that was the funniest part of the movie, was that explanation. It was just like,
I
he was
mean,
stupid.
I find it funny in a very dark sense, in the sense of like, wow, he just like hated this guy. You can tell he
Yeah, a lot
hated
of people
Timothy.
do.
But also, he knew
Yeah,
nothing about him. This is, again, exactly Into the Wild. They have a whole chapter where they
Hmm.
ask the Alaskans about him, and they all are like, he's horrible. He's the dumbest person alive, just referring to Christopher
it's everything we
McCandless.
hate about this type
And they
of
cite, though,
individual.
these crazy stories about, like, this guy thought he was going to become a caveman if he went out. And Christopher McCandless is just like this guy who was trying to restore himself to, like, a caveman persona. And it's like, no, he wasn't crazy. Like, that's not
He
an
wasn't a
accurate
caveman.
representation.
I would definitely put, it's like, I don't think there was anything about him returning to like pre-civilization,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
but it's
Right.
so yeah, it seemed like every conversation I came across Timothy Treadwell,
Yes.
someone at some point would go off and start like yelling about McCandless too. It's like, both of those
Yes.
guys, like just fuck those guys. It's like, I'm so glad they moved the bus. I was so tired of having you like go out and recover bodies. Like, these are people who actually, had to deal with the
Yeah.
fallout. So I can understand why they're angry, because there's imitators out there.
Well, I believe
But
the
they don't
guy
know them
who
personally, so it's
you're
different.
referring to, Nick, went and like got the bot, like went and helped collect the body parts, which I was also thinking like that must be traumatizing. Like that is a life
Hmm.
altering event to have to go like clean through a bare stomach to like be
Oh
like, oh, this
God.
is her, this is him, this is her, this is him. Like that's insane. So valid, I guess, if you want to be angry. But none of these people like cite anything about these people. But what it makes me question is like, so in Into the Wild or Into This, when they cite these other cases of people who we look at and we like laugh at and we're like, oh my God, these people are stupid. Is that because that's authentically their story, or just have they not had someone like a Herzog or like a oh my God, why am I blanking on the name? John Krakow. Is that because they've not had someone like them like go through and like tell the authentic story of their lives? I get caught up on that like a lot, where I'm like, what's the difference there?
One of the things I wrote early on in my notes is I said, this is about humanizing a punchline, because it almost seems like a
Yeah.
cautionary story or a punchline to a joke. It's a mix of both. And I wrote down Steve Irwin, of course. I mean, that was a joke to a lot of people. And then, of course, McCandless. More recently, the death of John Chow, the guy who went to that island. He wanted to bring Christianity there, and he'd been told over and over again, they do not want you there. They will kill you, and they killed him. People think that that's hilarious. What a stupid, stupid person to not yet, but we don't know John
Yeah.
Chow. And I'm not defending John Chow in any way. I think that what he did was incredibly unwise. And he was told many times, they will murder you, and they murdered him. Um,
Did anyone watch the movie? Not the document. The documentary, I think it's called The Mission, is
I've
fantastic and
seen the
really goes
mission.
into that.
I think that Last Days hasn't come out yet, or if it has, I
Okay.
There's a
haven't.
movie?
Yeah, I saw the trailer for that, and I was really troubled. I thought this might send a really horrible
Oh,
message, like
Yeah,
that
I've
he
not
did
seen it
nothing
either,
wrong.
but it
Yes,
gives the impression based off the trailer of like this guy was a great guy,
yes.
and he just like he is such a sympathetic character. He was just trying to do good, and I was like, that's an insane take. I have not seen the movie, but I was
No,
like considering like, ooh, should I watch it before this podcast? Um, yeah,
no,
that's a
it's
really good
very
shout, Hillary.
irresponsible. But yeah, it's
hmm.
about humanizing a punchline. If you talk to John Chow's parents, who are still around, this is someone that they love. We hear a lot from people who actually knew Timothy Treadwell, who loved him very much. It's the same with McCandless. There's the whole book, and there's the subsequent book that his sister wrote in the documentary that tells more about his parents and why he might have turned out the way he did, which is also very illuminating. It's, I mean, it's that way for anyone. I mean, there's even materials that humanize serial killers or mass shooters. There's people who love these people and they see things in a very different way. And it's, I think, once again, it comes to protecting ourselves and in some ways numbing ourselves with the truth of like our own deaths or people dying close to us, where it's like, well, if that person died in that extreme of a way because the decisions they made, like, it's just easy to reduce them. It's like they were fucking stupid. They deserved what they got, and that it's easier for us to move on, but for the people
Hmm.
who actually knew that person, it's not that simple.
Yeah, and also an element that's very clever about this structure. We mentioned before how it opens up basically with the death and the collection of the body, showing the area. The punchline is, oh, the guy who loved bears and wanted to be friends with them ended up getting eaten by a bear. But outside of the tragedy of his girlfriend being there, also a girlfriend that you find out towards the end, she was basically leaving him. She was ready to drop him as soon as they got back to civilization. Um, they were not supposed to be there. Like that's the punchline turns into real tragedy and unfortunate series of events where it's like, okay, they were not supposed to stay that long because of a mishap at the airport. They just decided to go back, which was a very bad choice, something they should not have done, and it's because of that that ultimately it ended in tragedy. Because otherwise, if they went back on the plane, I don't know what would have happened. Honestly, it's just the same cycle over and over again. Some other
Yeah.
tragedy might have happened, probably.
Or if it just hadn't been her, like, what
Yeah.
if she'd
Or
drawn
she
the
hadn't
line in
been
the
there.
sand where
Yeah.
she was just like, you know what? Because I guess like he got in an argument. I've heard different versions of the argument he had at the airport. If that had been the breaking point for her, where she said, you know what, Tim, I love you, but we're done. I'm gonna get a flight ticket and I'm gonna fly back. You can go back yourself. If she hadn't gone back with him, it would have just been him getting killed instead of her. There's
Mhm.
so many things that could have gone differently, but they didn't, and it's like the worst case scenario. The fact that she was there, um, and what happened to her is just horrible.
It is curious thinking how we'd view the story differently if they left and he like just survived. Like if he never died from bears, I think we would view him in like this massive positive light. Like I don't think there would be any really of this conversation of like, oh my god, he was so stupid. Oh my god, I can't believe he did this. It makes me think a lot about, again, Christopher McCandless. His story would never have been written if he didn't die. Unlike Timothy Treadwell, who like was sharing his story, and I'm assuming with the internet would share that story, you know, on a larger and larger platform. But you know, McCandless also tried to leave. If he just like went up a mile, he would have survived.
Oh
But
yeah, so
it
sad.
is interesting thinking like this tragedy really, this singular event rewrites 20 years of experience. It recontextualizes 20 years of experience for, you know, 20 years or however many years it was. Like he did this completely fine. I think we would have really worshipped him as a society a lot more than we do now, had he not just made that one error.
Yeah. Actually, there was
Yeah.
multiple conversations I came across where people talked about he died in 2003, and that was, just a few years before YouTube. Like he would have been a YouTuber. And I thought that's true. He would have just started uploading the video footage of him and the bears, and it would have gotten attention. It probably would have gotten a lot of criticism too. He would have. So I think as far as like his celebrity or how he would have become known, maybe he would have gotten attacked and eaten by a bear down the line anyway because it was just so risky what he was doing. But he would have become more famous.
There's also, I believe, a conversation in here that the bear, correct me if I'm wrong, but like it was not one of his regular bears. It was like a new bear to the area because of the time of year or something like
Yeah,
that.
the
I
others
think that
were
also is like,
hibernating and leaving.
yeah, I think that's also an interesting conversation because we're so general with like the bears got him, but really it was like this bear got him. Like all of his bears that he spent years with, he did have a system that like admittedly did work, right? Like he did do this with no issue for a long time in insane situations that no one should ever put themselves in. Also, he broke national park law, which I don't know our vibes on like how serious we take national park rules in Alaska, but he wasn't supposed to be that close to bears. He wasn't supposed to be staying for that long. I like that seemingly no one really cared from law enforcement, considering they just like let him do this. That's another factor in there. There's just a lot here. And I think like maybe slowly approaching the wrap up point here, like with a film like this and a story like this, but I think especially this framework, it really just creates so many what ifs and so many little factors you can look at, whether it's his friends around him. Hillary, you mentioned his friends, very different than how Christopher McCandless had all these friends, but he left to continue his journey. Treadwell undoubtedly like brings them into his web and doesn't let go, for better or for worse. You have his girlfriend, you have this flight. Like there's so many elements here that you can discuss and kind of weigh in your head. Like, how do you morally feel about them? How responsible are they for what happened? It's a text that I just find like I could literally have this conversation every single day for the next year and probably never get bored because there's so much that you can debate and get into. I must need to go find this AMA now. I had no idea she did this AMA, and admittedly, I would like to do more reading on this. I have not done much reading on Timothy Treadwell beyond the film, like I have Christopher McCandless. But I just think this is like, when it comes to cinema, when it comes to what stories do we tell through documentaries and the power of documentaries, I think Herzog is someone who really understands the potential for really finding that deeper level of engagement and critical thinking and higher order thinking. And it's something, again, throughout his career, he's made films before this, films after this that do the same thing. Ghost Elephants will be out on Disney Plus in March. It is very similar. It doesn't have the tragedy to it, but it has like a amazing character study at the center of it. I just think he's one of those that like really get it. And I think that's why so many of his films feel so engaging for me. And one of the reasons, as a documentary filmmaker, especially, we'll have a conversation one day on him as a narrative filmmaker. But it's one of the reasons I really love his work, I find. And it doesn't leave the brain. It stays on the mind far longer than most other films do.
I think he's just looking for mirrors of himself. I think if you're looking at every main character, so to say, of the documentaries that Herzog made, even the fiction, to be honest, they all kind of reflect his own insanity. Because it takes, if we, I mean, I use insanity broadly speaking, of course, because if you're looking at Treadwell's obsession with those bears and like going that deeply into nature, it's something that he has done many times in his own life. These contradictions of, in a way, you could say it like he was following his passion and doing what he really loved, thinking he was going to make a difference, and not really doing that. Could be said the same about the way he sees his own films. Like Herzog has never been particularly kind and proud of the work he's accomplished, in the sense of thinking like, I'm changing the world and making something special. It's like, no, I'm not really doing anything of value, almost in a way, without devaluing the actual art he's creating. And you see these parallels in some of the other characters. Little Dieter Needs to Fly, you mentioned the ones scaling the mountain, and it's always been present in his filmography, and especially after his period with Klaus Kinski in the 70s. You see this coming back more often than not. And I think that's why this really works, because if you had, I don't know, whatever no name documentarian for BBC or National Geographic making a documentary about Treadwell, it would feel different. It would look different. It would paint a different narrative. It would paint a different picture that probably would not go as deep in some of those areas, or maybe would go deeper into others while losing some of the personality of Treadwell, or losing some of the subjectivity of his life, as well as the objectivity or subjectivity, sorry, of others that were surrounding him. I think that's what makes Herzog really special, also because of having a very intimate production. If you're going to someone's house and it's just Herzog, maybe two, three other people at most, just like having a chat, he can break down their defenses, and he can make that one little joke that makes them laugh before they actually go into something serious. He can make them enact scenes that just don't make sense. And something that I love in all of his documentaries, you always have like a few scenes where, if you think about it, like, that's not a documentary scene. The scene where he's getting the woman on Palabak is getting the watch, the wristwatch. That's 100% a stage scene. It's not spur of the moment. You just have the camera. It's set up in a way to be slightly cinematic. I'm gonna get the thing, and I have the knife and the scissors right here, and putting it down. And he's looking constantly at the camera as he's saying, as if he has rehearsed that line in the corner. It has this element of fiction to it that is slightly absurd, and everyone is playing the role until she actually clicks. Like, there's that moment where you can almost see it. You can see the facade breaking of everyone playing into the scene, and then she's just like, "Fuck! This is the last thing I will have of him. Like, this is closing a circle. There's nothing more at this point. Like, he's just all gone." And I don't know. I think this is what makes Herzog truly special as a documentarian. The documentaries sometimes feel too fictional to be true, and the films are too real to be fictional almost. It's amazing.
Um, my last thoughts on this, because we're wrapping up, is one of the things I didn't know is that there's an assumption with Herzog that he makes documentaries about things that interest him. I think Grizzly Man might be an outlier because, from what I read, he was approached about this. And it does, like I said at the beginning, it does kind of give you an idea of like why the documentary is shaped the way it is or how it holds back on certain details, because it is, co-produced by people who knew and loved this guy. Um, and he ended up being the right person to do this. I agree with Nicolò completely. This is someone who actually understands that impulse to push yourself to a certain degree or put yourself in situations that are incredibly difficult. And like I said before, you are getting something out of it. And maybe it's something intangible, or maybe it's something intensely personal that other human beings can't understand. And I think what I'm walking away with this particular documentary, seeing it again, is that it really is a testament for how someone, a human being, can project their own personality so intensely on the situation around them that it's like it becomes their thing. It's quite remarkable that he was able to do that. But then again, he was with animals who couldn't talk back to him, and he was completely alone, and he was able to shape the narrative however he wanted. Um, and it wasn't very wise. Like Carson mentioned before, they brought in like the native indigenous um, perspective on things. And I think at one point the guy says, "This is how we've dealt with bears for 7,000 years. It's a very respectful. We stay out of their territory. They should have like their room to hunt, and we, live elsewhere." And it made me think of the trope that all of us are familiar with for every horror film. It's usually white people go to some place that's, not so safe, and they encounter the locals at a gas station or, a general store, and they say, "I don't think you should be doing this." And they do it anyway. And they, fall under the machete or evil trees or the curse of Satan or whatever it is that's going to come and get them. It's very important to listen to the locals, and, they might actually know what they're talking about. And I think there's just a few scattered thoughts of things I wrote down that I want to share. One of them is that I really highly recommend, and I'll put this in the show notes, that I put in like that letterbox list, recommendations for a podcast. Anything I mention or links or things I mentioned, I try to put it in there. I'll put the AMA in there with Jewel. And there's also a YouTube video that someone recommended on Reddit. And it's this video by a psychologist named Andrew Vandervaart. He has a PhD in psychology. It's called the Tim Treadwell Delusion. And he breaks down, in his opinion, what he think might be going on with Treadwell. And it was absolutely fascinating to watch and listen to, because it starts building to a certain point where I thought, no, you're not doing this. And I won't spoil it, but he has some very interesting theories about why things ended the way they did. Very fascinating stuff. Maybe not necessarily the truth, but I'll leave the link to that. And then if you want to see another example of someone who reminded me of Timothy Treadwell, and this is a notorious movie, if you guys haven't heard about this, or you have, either way, there's a movie called Roar. Very similar situation about a guy who was raising wild animals in his home in a preserve, and he just recorded his family and this film crew being mauled by lions for like 5 years, and it got cut together into a film called Roar. You can get on Blu-ray, you could stream it. Very Treadwell. He's in the film. He walks around. He yells a lot. He thinks he has dominion over these lions. The lions are like jumping up and knocking him over and biting him like for 2 hours. Very similar psychological makeup there. So if you want to see another example of people just not being smart with wild animals or fully respecting them, but and it's a lot more terrifying in a way, you can watch Roar. It would make a very interesting double feature with Grizzly Man. So that's all I have to say. I'm wrapping it up at this point. But
I love your letterbox review where you mention Timothy Treadwell. That's so funny that you mentioned this. Back like years ago, I could find actually the year. Back in 2022, I think we did this for our Road to Halloween series. We included this on one of our episodes. So I would recommend it also. It's a wild film.
Mm-hmm. And the making of is definitely worth looking into. Someone gave me the Blu-ray, and there's a documentary with this guy's family, and it's like his adult sons are like, "Our dad was an asshole." for doing this to us. And it's like, yeah, I think your dad like allowing lions to like scalp people and like bite into their faces and stuff like that for his movie is he's insane. So that's fair.
Yep. Well, I think that is going to wrap up our conversation on Grizzly Man. Please go check this out if you've not already. I would love also, like, especially this episode, if anyone listening has thoughts, email them, comment them, send them over. I would love to hear what you people think. I know at least in the States, this is currently streaming on Criterion Channel, but I think it's widely available pretty much throughout whatever country you're in. So check out this, check out other Herzog works. Love it. Love talking about Herzog and love talking about Grizzly Man. With that, let's go to our question of the week. We have a big one. I kind of dropped a big bomb this week because I asked everyone, what is your favorite documentary features? Just overall, documentaries. What are we recommending as our favorites? Nick, I know you for some reason had issues coming up with a list in 2 hours of your all-time favorite documentaries. I don't know why. But what did you select as your favorite documentaries?
Good lord, I needed like a week to think about this question. It was hard. It was really hard. I managed to narrow it down to 3 picks. Because of course, like we're talking feature documentaries, but I wanted to highlight a short film documentary, which I love. I know how it. I know, Carson. The mic is mine at this point. No, but I do love "The House Is Black" by Farooq Farrokhzad, Iranian documentary, 1963. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. 21 minutes of true empathy and true poetry about a leper colony in Iran. A friend of mine told me of some horrific things that happened years later to that same colony, which makes it even more tragic to think about. Also, speaking of tragedy, I think it's like barely a feature film, which is why I was like, I don't know if this is like the actual choice. Night and Fog by Alain René, about Auschwitz and the Holocaust. In my opinion, the best work about World War II genocide, war crimes against everyone, and finding poetry in some way, and if any beauty at all in the aftermath of deeply, deeply horrific crime. Love Night and Fog, not an easy watch, either of these, but a film that is fairly easy watch in my opinion, and probably my favorite documentary is actually by Werner Herzog, Land of Silence and Darkness. I love Land of Silence and Darkness. It's a type of movie that it's disarmingly simple. Herzog, sound guy, following this community of deaf, blind, um, I'm blank, blind and deaf people. Yes, sorry, which is so emotional. Seeing people who don't have access to 2 of the key senses just go through life trying the best they can to help other people. There's an entire sequence where you can see how they teach children who are born like this or children who develop these disabilities how to survive and live and go through life. And this was shot in 1970. So there have been incredible advancements in technology since then, but still going back there, I don't know, it's almost a comfort watch in a way. I've seen it multiple times at this point, because it just gives me hope. I talked about 2 documentaries that don't really give me hope, unfortunately, and Land of Silence and Darkness is just warmth, pure warmth. So highly recommended.
Warm picks from Nick this week. Hillary, what documentaries are you going to recommend?
Oh, it was such a tough question for me to come up with a singular answer. I do have a list that I'll include if the show notes called My Documentary Canon. That's like a list of all the documentaries I know and love, but I pulled it up. There's some that I'll highlight here. The first one that actually came to mind is one that I can't say like, oh, it's such a well-made documentary, like it's the best documentary ever made. But as far as one that, had made a big impression on me is Girl 27, which was about Patricia Douglas, so a woman who got raped during a party at MGM, and the fallout from that, and of course the repercussions of that kind of abuse taking place in the Hollywood system. It was made in 2007, so long before the Me Too movement. There's a lot of insights in there. I love Grey Gardens, but I love the Beals of Grey Gardens even more. It's a lot of the B-roll. There's a lot more kitty cats in it. And Jerry, if you know Grey Gardens, Jerry is like a someone who works on the property that those two women adore. Struggle. It's a Netflix documentary, The Life and Art of Zukowski. Sorry, I'm probably just like butchered his name. I've watched that multiple times. And then the last one I'll highlight, it's like a hybrid documentary, but just F or Fake. It's my favorite Orson Welles film, and it's basically him fucking with you for like an hour and 20 minutes. What a way to live. So those are the ones I'm highlighting, but I think there's like 60 in this list. I like documentaries quite a bit, so don't we all?
No, documentaries are the best. I like have really lacked on ClapperCast, and I've felt this and been trying to be like intentional in planning next year. Like, I would love to include more documentaries because they're such fascinating films to talk about that often don't get the recognition they deserve. Some of my favorite films I've ever seen are documentaries, but I narrowed it down to 4. It's a very hard question to answer briefly. I will say Flea from 2021, I want to say. It's a mix of it's an animated documentary about an immigrant experience, a queer immigrant experience that always just really touches me. It like makes me cry every time. There's specifically a scene towards the end where he is discussing with his father about his queerness that always just gets me right in the heart. I don't know if either of you have seen this. I hope so. 1998 from Bennett Miller, actually. The Cruise is about
Yes.
Yeah, I love this movie. It's also just such like a Carson movie. But it's about this New York City tour guide who rides this bus, and he does the bus tour in New York City. But he's like in love with the city. He loves the city and has like this deep emotional, physical, sexual, even you could say, connection to the city. And it's just infectious how he talks about this city and how he talks about the energy and the buildings. And then it translates into like his views on life and how to live life and what to value in life. Adore it. South from 1919 is one of the most like well put together adventures I've ever seen in cinema. It's about this voyage to Antarctica, and you just go on the ship with these people who go to Antarctica and all the trials and tribulations that come from traveling to Antarctica in the 1919. And it has so many twists and turns. It's so well made, but it's one of those documentaries where it just feels like fiction, but it's not fiction. It's reality, and it's larger than life. And it's an experience that every time is just so gripping to me. I would love to see this one on the big screen. And then finally, I have Marlon Riggs' Tongues United. I'll be on, or Untied, excuse me, Tongues Untied. I always get that confused. I would say Marlon Riggs, without a doubt, for me, is the best documentary filmmaker ever to exist. He is absolutely remarkable with his looks at queerness, his looks at race. Every single one of his documentaries is worthwhile, but this one especially, I find to be so moving, so touching. This conversation of queerness and race in the heights of the AIDS crisis. Truly remarkable. I just bought his Criterion set. So I'm happy to now finally have all of his films, his shorts, his features, because it really is, I think, remarkable. So some great recommendations. If you just take this list as like your next watch list for the next month or so, I guarantee you're going to have so much great cinema here to enjoy. But with that, I think that's going to do it for us today, guys. Nick, where can we find you and your work online?
You can find me on pretty much every platform at NickieGrant97. You can listen to my other podcast, the Carson and Hilary have been guests on, called Anatomy of Adaptation. And you can watch my short films on YouTube and Vimeo at Enjoy the Movies. Just recently, I finally published 2023 production, 2024 premiere film, Phantom Touch, about a queer long-distance relationship that's slowly crumbling from afar. Very experimental, very personal, very raw. So I hope you like it.
I love that. It won't be for you at home watching this, but I will mention, I don't know if Hillary, if you are seeing this, Nick's video is like 20 seconds behind what he's actually saying. So I'm getting these delayed reactions to everything, and it's very entertaining sometimes. I would highly recommend anyone go like open up 2 links of the YouTube version, have one play like 20 seconds behind, because you'll be talking about like this horrific subject. Nick is like, yes, I love that.
Oh no.
Like, not the no, Nick, please no. So that's very uncanny valley for me right now, but that's okay. Hillary, where where can we find your work and stuff online?
Well, if it makes you guys feel better, I don't have the delay, so Nicolò's reactions haven't been 20 seconds off. He's pretty much in time, so hopefully
That's good.
The way things turn out, it won't be too strange. And I want to second what Carson said about Tongues Untied. I've watched that twice this year. I wasn't aware of Marlon Briggs until this year, which is a crime. Amazing documentarian. Definitely one of my favorite documentaries of this year. So I'm seconding that as well. You can find me on Letterboxd. I'm under the name Degelle, Degelle. And there's a campsite.bio link you can click on. They'll take you to pretty much everywhere that I put stuff on the internet. Or you can just go to a browser and type in campsite.bio/Degelle, and it'll just take you to all of those links immediately.
Love it. And you can find me on Letterboxd, just Carson Timar, Twitter or Blue Sky. Also, though I don't really post there. Thank you so much for joining us today for Grizzly Man. Next week, we tackle Megalopolis. It will be an interesting episode, but I'm excited to get into it. And then I'll even include a little teaser. If Megalopolis doesn't do it for you, next week I'm going to have an announcement about a future series, a pretty big series we're going to do here on the podcast. So that's coming next week. So even if you don't care about Coppola and you don't care about those big Coppola retrospective we've done, which you should listen to all the episodes because it makes a really beautiful narrative going into Megalopolis. Hopefully you tune in for that at least. So with that, thank you so much for joining us, for listening, for supporting the podcast. It's been a great year, and I cannot wait to continue the fun, continue the conversations, and continue celebrating cinema. So with that, goodbye.